Okay. So what I'm going to try to do is go through some of the builds that are possible in fleet battles for both the Rebels and Imperial side. I'll go through the different roles and some considerations, some of my preferred builds, and then what is still viable in the meta. There might be some other things that people haven't tried, but I'll give an overview of the viable tactics as I see them for each role and each ship filling those roles. Any questions before I start?
Nope.
Okay, so the I'm going to start with the X-wing, and that means basically I'm going to start with the what's called the Flex PK role, and that's basically as the meta is at the moment in fleet battles. You have usually two fighter class ships in your team of five in a five team, and their job is primarily to be the more evasive and support um, role for the attack. So their primary focus is going to be on stripping shields of the enemy capital ships and flagship and support ships, providing support cover for the bombers, so in ionizing, disabling, and perhaps destroying enemy players, and also for damage, doing some damage that they can to the hull of the Raider corvette, the cruisers, and subsystems of the flagship. Um, their damage output is not going to be quite as high as the bomber, so they're not going to be the main damage dealers on the capital ships. But it's important that they actually contribute to that, because if they don't, the enemy team will be able to focus down the bombers, and you'll have no true offensive capability in the game, and eventually you'll lose because you haven't progressed in the main objective of fleet battle, which is to destroy the enemy team's capital ships. So what we'll be looking at is various loadouts that you could run on the fighter, specifically here the X-Wing, in order to meet the objective of what the Flex PK is supposed to do. So by flex, it means, to be clear, flexing between capital ship damage, shield stripping, and PK, which is player killing, player maybe even player neutralization might be a better word for it than player killing, because neutralizing the enemy players is just as important as killing them at times when you're trying to protect your bombers, who are going to be doing the majority of the damage. So in order to be able to do this, I've set up a few different loadouts. One of them, I think the main loadout that I would say for fighters for X-Wing is to go burst cannon, where you have high DPS. So the burst cannon will give you some of the highest DPS for your primary weapon, and you'll actually be able to do a fair amount of damage with that, both against enemy players and against capital ships. You'd be surprised how much damage a burst cannon over time will do to an enemy capital ship. It doesn't look like it's doing much. You'll tick 1% here, 1% there, but really what the fighter is supposed to be is a very evasive, very consistent, irksome, annoying addition to the damage. And so you're not going to be doing boom, big damage like a bomber will, but the picking things off here, 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 eventually you'll end up adding up a lot of damage, and it will could make all the difference between finishing off a cruiser and not finishing off a cruiser. In addition, if you are doing damage and the enemy team's objective is to prevent you from doing capital ship damage, they'll now have to target the X-Wings. They'll now have to target the more maneuverable, harder to kill in some ways, fighters, which will pull a lot of the heat off of the bombers so that they can do their job without being completely focused down. As an X-Wing, you're supposed to basically be flying exceedingly evasively. Especially when you get shot, you should have some boost energy ready so that you can start dodging with boost drifts, with boost jumps, boost gas, a little bit of pinballing if you can. So you'll want to have engine energy ready because you're not going to be able to, especially against an enemy bomber or heavy fighter that's loaded out to kill you, you're not going to be able to go toe to toe with them and expect to survive just in a weapon unloading feast. Like you're going to have to bounce around quite a bit in a fighter, and again, that means that the burst cannon is really good against the cruisers because the burst cannon is designed to poke. It's designed to be that poke attack as opposed to, say, the lasers or the rotary, which I guess isn't available for it anyway, which would be a more steady stream of attack. So you sort of could look at the X-wing and the TIE fighter as well as a pokey poke damage dealer. You shouldn't be looking at it as you're going in. You're not an A10. You're more of like I don't know, but yeah, you're poking around.
Fighter with the Grishkin Shipunov cannons, like you poke and then re-aim, poke, re-aim.
Yeah, exactly. So the two main auxiliary weapons that are really useful for your team as a fighter are ion missile, which is what you'll be using to strip shields. Basically, any team of 5 in fleet battles needs to have 3, at least 3, no less than 3 ionization weapons. That can be 3 aux weapons. It can be 2 primaries and 1 aux, which is unlikely. But it should be 3. So that means that 2 people, at least 2 people have to have some ion. One person can go double ion, like ion missile, ion cannon, or ion missile, ion torp, but another person still has to go ion. Any less than that, and you're going to find yourself not having enough ion stripping, and also you're going to be too dependent on one person to strip shields, and if they're dead, your entire attack phase is paused until you can ion strip, because almost every other weapon that's not ionization is really inefficient at stripping shields. So that ion missile is going to be really, really useful. Not only that, the ion missile is one of the best, if not the best way to neutralize and attack enemy players, especially enemy players that are harder to kill. Once you get them ionized, they're going to be flying straight, and you can shoot them a lot easier. Not only that, if they're on the rebel side, you've neutralized their shields temporarily, and now all you have to do is shoot their hull. Ion missile, probably the most valuable aux in the game, certainly for fighter. In every build, pretty much you will have ion missile in one of your auxes on a fighter. Concussion missile is another pretty good attack anti-starfighter and anti-capital ship weapon. It doesn't do as much damage as people sometimes think. People think, oh, missile, boom, but lasers don't do much. The laser actually will do a fair amount. It's nice to have concussion missiles too. It's a good burst damage. It's good against subsystems to burst damage because you don't have much time sometimes shooting at a subsystem. It's good for that extra damage while you're poking. One or 2 burst shots, a concussion missile, an ion missile shot off, dumbfired, and boom, you've got actually a fair amount of poke damage there. It's not a lot, but it's a fair amount for a good poke. And that would be a pretty good loadout for basically the entire fleet battle. Once you're done with shields and you're at a stage where you're mostly doing hull, you could consider going something more hull favorable, like concussion missile rocket, or let me look at some other options. You could go theoretically proton torpedo. You could theoretically go. I think that would be really the only viable option. Other than rockets, to get you just a little extra hull damage. But keep in mind that those ion missiles will be useful even to the very end. If your support player is marking the flagship, then an ionization missile on one missile on each of the shield gens will take down temporarily, will take down the whole shield. So that's an easy way to take down temporarily the shield so you can finish off those subsystems and then others. So I wouldn't underestimate ion missile. Sorry, go ahead.
Also, if the flagship is marked, an ion missile, if it's about to flip the face, you can ion missile the targeting, and then that's going to give your fleet a more lasting time, because it's gonna reduce their passive damage, and plus the ion missile also deals damage to power. If you fire an ion missile, concussion, then a few bursts, you can take down power in one run as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. So basically, the way I usually run X-Wings is to go with fortified shield and reinforced hull, just to get a little more survivability. It takes away some of your acceleration and maneuverability, but you're already pretty maneuverable. The majority of your motion is going to be based on boosting anyway, so it's a reasonable loss to take. The other is shields. I like the fortified deflector. Again, it helps you not getting bursted down really fast. Basically, if you're in an X-wing or a fighter, you can't boost all the time. Let me be clear. Just because you're in a fighter doesn't mean you should be boosting and pinballing all the time. But when you start getting shot, the minute you start seeing your shield go down, that's your indication. I need to start moving. I need to start boosting, dodging, everything. And that means that you need to have a little bit of reflex time, and the fortified deflector, to me, gives you that reflex time. It gives you that ability to, oh, I'm getting shot, I should do something, and you still have some shields to protect you while you're now engaging in the evasive pattern. As for engine, I use standard, but jet could also be totally viable. I really wouldn't go slam, but maybe some people do. Basically, you want high speed, and you don't want to sacrifice that speed, but you also do want a fair bit of boost. So I'd probably lean towards jet or regular on that one. And that's for the fighter, for the X-wing. Any other questions on that? Okay, so let me.
Can I add a tad bit of info?
Yeah.
So regarding the ion missile, which is probably the best component, the best offensive and more versatile component in the game, the best way to fire an ion missile, if the enemy is closing in on you 400 meters, if you are closing in on the enemy, maybe a bit less than that, 350. And if you boost or drift as well, it's going to give the missile an instant boost of acceleration for some reason. I think it's something embedded in the code. It also works for the heavier torpedoes, but with the ion missile, it actually makes it go as if it was a anti-starfighter missile for the first half a second, and that can make the difference between getting the dunk or not getting the dunk.
If you're going against players with the ion missile, yeah. That's good.
Yeah, right. But I'm just
right.
illustrating that it behaves similarly to a torpedo when you launch it in that fashion.
Now let me be clear, since we're talking about dunking, which is a term for ionizing and disabling enemy player fighters. There's an order of priorities that you have when you're a flex fighter in fleet battles. Your number one priority is shield stripping. It's your number one priority, actually. You're the one with the ionization, assuming you have ionization, which almost every fighter should have. Your number one priority is shield stripping. Your second priority is, if you're on defense, is to kill enemy players. If you're on offense, your second priority is to do capital ship damage. Your priority is actually not to kill enemy players on offense. You should be focusing on doing damage. And you say, oh, but if I don't kill the players, they're going to kill my guys. Well, they're going to kill you guys eventually anyway. The thing is that if you're doing damage to the capital ships, you're going to progress the game faster, which means that even if they kill your guys, you've already progressed the game. Not only that, but if you're actually doing damage, the people that are focusing, like I said, the people that are going to focus the bombers are going to have to focus you, otherwise they're going to pay for it. The amount of damage an X-Wing can do, if it is left unattended, is almost as much as a bomber. It's not quite as high, but it's almost as much. So if they completely ignore you, they're going to basically pay for it. and make them pay for it. Do the damage with the cruisers. Do the damage. Take out subsystems. X-Wing's perfectly capable of taking out subsystems. In some essence, it's more capable because it can maneuver around. You can orbit really easily with it with a fighter, with an X-Wing, and you can be really annoying and poke at those subsystems constantly. Don't underestimate that. Then after that, if there's certain reasons that you don't want to focus a capital ship damage, your team is focused elsewhere or needs help elsewhere, you could look at doing some dunking and kills. But for the most part, actually, you're going to find maybe 60% of the time on offense, you should be doing capital ship damage. You should be doing capital ship damage. And you're quite capable of it. I think that's what I'd say. Now, to that point of the role, there's another ship that you could theoretically use for that role. I think it's inferior. I think that a lot of people see it as inferior, which would be an A-Wing, and on the Imperial side, a TIE Interceptor. The issue with the A-Wing is that it doesn't have ion missile capability, which is a big minus when you consider that the ion missiles are the best aux to have in that role, because it helps strip shields really quick, and it helps one tap ionize dunk enemy fighters, and doing all the other disables to subsystems that Viana talked about. The cluster missile is pretty good against subsystems. It does a pretty good damage, as does the quick lock missile. You could use those two, but again, I think the damage output of the A-Wing is less overall. And not only that, it's really, really paper thin. So unless you're really good at evasive play and hit and run, hit and run, hit and run, and getting out of there and not sticking around or being evasive enough that you can't get shot, you're going to just be at a huge disadvantage. It's too easy to kill them, and they do too little damage for the effort involved. So you're going to end up working really hard in it, and it's just not going to do the damage you need, and it's not going to provide the ionization that your team needs. So I would mostly recommend against A-Wing. Now, there is one type of role that sort of exists in some play in Fleet Battle, which is to truly be just PK, only be player kill, only player kill. If you have that role and say you have like either 3 bombers and 1 player kill only, or you have 1 flex PK who's almost completely objective based, and so you have the room for that other guy to be almost completely a player kill, then an A-Wing and TIE Interceptor are viable, annoying ways to be a player kill, but I don't think that really works at the highest levels.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
It's very situational to have a dedicated PK in a fleet battle, and it's kind of like, okay, almost like when you're going against a team that you've played before, and you go, okay, they're gonna go super heavy PK, and you have that guy that can run fighter screen, but the whole team has to be on board and know that you're not going to be contributing to cap ship,
right?
Because you see it all the time where like teams will go super heavy PK, and then when you look and they lose, and you see the spread at the end, and you'll see these guys that were flying around and they were 17 kills, 18 kills, right? 4 cap ship damage. Right?
Yeah.
And wonder why they're probably sitting there like scratching their head like, I did really good. Why did I lose? Because like the objective is to kill the enemy ships, not their players.
Yeah. It's a very niche possibility, and it almost invariably ends up failing. The only thing is if your other guys are completely objective based and really are 100% focused on that, it might be doable in some games. But yeah, it's as Chef said, the goal of fleet battles in the end is to kill the enemy capital ships, not the enemy players. The enemy capital ships. You can kill enemy players all day, and if you don't kill their capital ships, doesn't matter. It could be annoying to play against, certainly if there's an A-Wing PKer. There's no doubt that is an annoying game to play because you're just going to keep getting shot down. But the thing is that you might get shot down, but if your team's the one doing objective damage and they're not, then they're going to lose eventually. Yeah, so I wouldn't recommend A-Wing in fleet battles almost ever. Maybe I'd, something like this, rapid fire cannon, rockets, and then you could just like pick at players, or like I said, the cluster missile, and anti starfighter quick lock. Sorry, the quick lock missile.
Yeah, just a funny note on that.
Mhm.
We've been doing a lot of like three and four stacks lately, and going to fleet battles. And then we look at the spread and we go, "Who's in the fucking A-wing?" Like, oh, it's our fifth.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, there'll be some people. I mean, I've seen some people do it decently well, but in the end, um, it does a lot less than you think. You could get 17 kills and say, "Wow, you get 17 kills." It's certainly annoying to play against, but if your team can't do the objective with it, then it won't matter. It's
Yeah, and I
possible.
think
I've never seen it at the highest levels, and to do it right, you have to have a set team that's going to the other three people are going to have to be pure objective, basically.
yeah, I was just gonna say it's the only reason I could see to use it, because I've seen it used in a strategy where they'll run, like a team will run like multi-interceptors, but it's like a distraction because they know that'll get players to like be like, okay, fuck it, I gotta go PK now,
Right.
and then they'll switch off, and you're still getting killed, but now you're not doing objective damage.
Yeah.
That's the only time I've ever seen it be effective, is when it gets people so frustrated that they stop focusing on what they're doing.
Right. Basically, if you can drag the enemy team into playing PK as well, then you brought them into your game, and now you're going to win at your game. But if they say, okay, well, we'll live with being shot, and we're going to continue doing objective damage, then you won't be able to kill them fast enough. Okay, so let's move on to the next role, which is bomber. So the bomber is basically the bomber has a few different roles. Some of which one of the bombers may take, or both of the bombers may take. Usually you'll have two bombers. You could have three theoretically, but usually you'll have two. The roles of the bomber are primarily objective damage, to do hull damage to the cruisers, to do hull damage to the raider, corvette, and to take out subsystems and the rest on the flagship. The other role that one or both bombers will do is farm, so to kill the AI packs that will show throughout the map, and to... what was the third thing? Objective damage, farm. And maybe sometimes will help with defensive PK. Maybe. Depending on the map, depending on how much farm is available, they may, on defense, switch over to defensive PK help. And so maps like Galatan, or maybe Sasubo, where one person who's very farm heavy, 100% farm, could do it and doesn't need a second person to help. And so that other person, once the raider vet is down, has nothing else to do but defensive PK. And so the other bomber might do that. But basically, okay, so here's the main build, as I see it, for the bomber. This is the most utility build, works basically in almost any scenario, is very damage intense, but also really good at farming, really good at defense. So you could run this throughout the entire fleet battle. It'd be great against subsystems. It'd be great against cap ships doing damage. The rotary cannon, especially if you can double charge it, which is easy to do on the bomber, not so easy to do on the Y-Wing, just does a lot of hull damage. A lot of hull damage. If you have nothing else going on, or in addition to what you're doing, you just unload that rotary. That's a lot of DPS, and over time, that they'll be paying for that. Not only that, that rotary cannon does a lot of DPS, and so like I was saying, that sometimes the bomber will do defensive player killing. The bomber may ironically be sometimes one of the best at defensive player killing against enemy bombers. Enemy bombers are slow. They're usually less maneuverable. They're bouncing around less. They're easier to hit, but they're hard to actually kill, to burn down, because they have so much hull. Your rotary cannon is going to be possibly the answer to taking down enemy bombers. When your enemy fighter cover doesn't have enough DPS to burn through them quick enough before they do their thing, you might be called upon to use that rotary cannon, burn them down. I wouldn't recommend using it against really maneuverable ships very often, but it could be used in those circumstances. The Goliath missile, if used right, is really good, the best at farming. You could take out a full pack with one shot, Goliath, pretty quickly, especially if it gets the right angle and doesn't have to circle around. It also has an AoE, a damage effect. It could be shot dumbfired. If you shoot it at enemy cruisers, they'll take out numerous turrets, or at the Corvette Raider, they'll take out numerous turrets near the impact point. That in itself is very useful to helping reduce the passive damage your team takes when you're going against the cruisers and the Vet and all these things. But it also brings extra hull damage to the ship you're shooting. So if you take out with a Goliath and you shoot out a number of turrets off of a Vet or Raider or Cruiser, the amount of hull damage that you do is much higher than the amount of hull damage you would do if you didn't take out those turrets. So one of the things that when you're using the Goliath that you'll want to look at is aim for a side of the ship you haven't shot yet. If you've already shot that side of the ship, especially with some sort of AoE, all those turrets are already dead. So when you shoot the Goliath, it'll do a lot less damage on that side. Try and look for a side of the cruiser, side of the Vet that you've yet to shoot. It'll blow up a lot of turrets, and in doing so, that Goliath will do a lot more damage than it normally would. A Goliath can do as little as like 3 or 4% on a Corvette, and it could do as much as 15 or 16% if you actually shoot number of the turrets out. And you could shoot, theoretically, I think up to about 4, maybe 5, at least 4 turrets off of a Vet at once, and you could shoot about that many as well off of a cruiser if you aim it right. There are certain aim points to look for on the cruisers. Usually a decent center of mass should get you a fair amount, but so middle of the Vet, middle of the Raider, center of mass of the pieces of the cruisers will get you a fair bit. So shoot it from one side. If you already shot it from that side, shoot from the other. It does great damage.
I was just gonna say if you're shooting at the light cruisers on the Empire, you want to go top and bottom.
Yeah.
And then if you're
side
the
and
Nebulon
side.
Bs, side and side,
Yeah.
front and back, so you can actually like have 4 of the.
Right, because it's got the two pieces. It's got the front
Yeah.
piece and the back piece, which you can do side and side as well.
I think
That's a
there's
good point.
more turrets on the Nebulon B on the front and front, right and left sides are like the massive turrets.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So up and down on the Imperial ones, and left, right on the Rebel ones. But it's also really good at farming. If your role is to also farm, you should have a Goliath. It's not as good when the packs split up. So in maps where you have a lot of either where they've already gotten pretty close to your flagship, or in maps where there's a lot of debris like Galatan or Sasubo, the packs will tend to break up. Their pathing won't stay the same, won't stay together, and so the Goliaths will do less good at farming than say on maps like Fostar, especially at the beginning on Fostar, Yavin, Esselis. On these maps, the Goliaths will be great for farm because the packs of AI will stick together before they start pathing apart, and one shot from the Goliath will, through the AoE, kill, theoretically, if you aim at the center one, all 5. If you aim at one of the edge ones, it'll take 3 or 4 usually. So you'll want to try and find which one's the center of the pack and then aim at him. If you have a more spread out pack, you have a few stragglers, the multi-lock missile is good for that. The multi-lock missile is a little less reliable, especially on the Imperial side, for killing X-Wing AI, but it's still pretty good. You'll still get most of them either half of them killed and most of them at least down to about killed, so you could just shoot them once or twice and finish them off. The multi-lock missile is much better at farming on maps like Galatan, where the packs are more split. So if you see a together pack, use your Goliath. If the pack's starting to split up, that's when you want to use the multi-lock. So this actually is a very versatile farming build either way, you can farm. And not only that, for the same reason that you do damage to the cruisers by shooting the turrets down, your multi-locks, while they don't do directly very much damage, if they can multi-lock onto a number of the turrets of the cruisers, they can do decent, not great, but decent damage to the cruisers as well. So basically, your damage primarily on this build to the cruisers would come from the Rotary and the Goliath, but some of it will come from the multi-lock, and don't underestimate that. And if you're lucky, maybe passively, you might find that a couple AIs are running around as well, and you get a few free for your troubles.
There's actually, if you want to reference, Fenkar has a really good video about how to do cap ship assault in a farming loadout.
So this build actually will do a fair bit of damage. It's not my preferred offensive build, but a lot of people use it throughout the entire game. Another thing is reinforced hull. When you're in the Y-Wing, unlike the X-Wing where you're going to be bouncing around a lot, the Y-Wing you could do a bit of boost drifting and moving around, but the fact is you're not going to be able to be pinbally enough to be unshootable. So you need to be fairly tanky, and one of the ways to be tanky is that reinforced hull. And then the other thing I noticed is it's very rare that I actually get shot down with missiles. Usually I'll get dunked if it's anything with the Oxes. So I go with Ray Shield because the most likely way I'm going to get shot down in a Y-Wing is from someone's primary weapon. So Ray Shield's the way to go. Jet engine. In the Y-Wing, sadly, you cannot shunt to engines. But with the latest patches, the activation is really low. And so boost gasping is the way to go. Jet engine makes that even more viable. So you'll do a lot of boost drift to get places. And the jet engine makes that happen all the time. Sadly, with the jet, you won't be able to get as far in a single boost, but you'll find that it makes you more likely to be unhittable if you keep boosting and drifting anyway, because people won't be able to get a consistent lead on you. You'll be constantly going stuttering, and they won't be able to hopefully get as good of a lead on you. And that would be that loadout for the Y-Wing. The other loadouts that I have, especially for this one's for subsystems. So when I'm going against subsystems, often in the Y-Wing, because it's hard to maneuver it sometimes, I'll usually mosquito more than I will pinball around a subsystem. So even if it's the shield generator, which is theoretically the one you're supposed to pinball around, I'll still just go straight at it, and either I'll come in from one of the sides, or I'll just be right on it and stuck right on it, like I would the MC-75 shield. Now, when you're stuck right on it, you're going to be a target. So basically, the role there is to do as much damage as you can to the subsystem before the enemy can burn you down. The hope is you're tanky enough that it'll take the enemy long enough to burn you down that by that time you've already done your damage anyway, and you've done your job. Now, it'd be nice to survive it, but likely you probably won't. So the most damage that I see that you can do by just sticking and looking forward is rotary, the beam cannon, which I would certainly recommend not activating until you've got your momentum correct, because once you start activating the beam cannon, your momentum's going to be locked, and you're going to just drift past stuff. So definitely the beam is the last thing to activate on this trio, and the Goliath, which you can dumbfire and will do a fair bit of forward damage. And often I've gotten some lucky shots where some guy was near me trying to kill me. I shoot the Goliath at the subsystem, and the splash damage actually kills him, protects me for even longer. So that would be a pretty good, and then once you start up that beam cannon, you get the rotary running, you've got a lot of forward damage going, and usually you can take down at least one subsystem before getting killed if you do it right. Again, reinforced hull, ray shield, most likely way they're going to take you down. They're not going to take you down with anything else usually. That's for subsystems, so I would use that only when we got to the flagship subsystem phase. The other offensive build that I use for opening and for cruiser phase is this one. And again, you can even farm in this one. It's not as farm worthy as the pure defensive one of this one, with the multi-lock because you don't have multi-locks to support your Goliath. And so if it's a map where all the AIs are split, it's going to be really hard to farm on that map with this build. But you might be able to do it. But I do this mostly in order to up the damage output capability, especially when I'm working in synchronous with a support who can provide resupply. The rotary cannon, again, does a lot of damage. Don't underestimate that. Goliath missile against the turrets, really good. You can also sometimes, I was talking about burning down, this is a slight aside, I was talking about burning down bombers when you're in defensive PK. If someone's asking, we can't burn down these bombers fast enough, you shoot them with a rotary, and then not only that, if they're standing still mosquitoing on your subsystem, shoot them dead fire with a Goliath. You'll take them out pretty quick. Actually, Dumbfire Goliath, really good viable if they're jousting you, or if they're just sitting stationary, make them pay for it. Dumbfire Goliath at them. Next would be the Proton Bomb, which does a lot of damage to cruisers. A lot of damage. It's very fast. You drop the bombs. You can drop them immediately. Ask for resupply from your support. Get another set of bombs after a few seconds. Don't shoot them right away, because if you shoot them right away, you won't get the full set back. You have to wait for it to actually fill up. But when you get the refill, you can go back in, make another run. By then, maybe your Goliath's recharged as well. Goliath recharge is usually a little slower than the recharge for if you get a resupply right away. But you should be able to shoot a Goliath a little after that again as well. Make a number of runs on the cruisers, and you could do a lot of damage. I mean, I've had it where I could take down a whole cruiser just on one combined run. A support resupplies me 4 or 5 times. An entire cruiser's done just by that combo. And then maybe all 3 of the other players are on the other cruiser. So we got 1 bomber, two fighters on the other cruiser, 1 bomber, 1 support on this cruiser, and you usually take that cruiser out faster than those other 3 fighters can take that can take out the other ship, because the bombs, if resupplied, can do a lot of DPS. This build I would not want to use usually against flagship. There are ways that you can bomb the shield gens on the MC-75 with the bombs, and there are ways that you could bomb the power systems on the Star Destroyer with the bombs. It's doable. I don't like doing it, but if you really want to use that build, like you're in it and you want to go to flagship phase, basically, if you're going against the MC-75, try bombing along the shield gens, and if you're going against the Star Destroyer, try bombing the power systems. And you won't be able to take them out 100% with just the bombs, but a Goliath plus a little bit of rotary plus the bombs should certainly do it. If you get all your bombs to hit. Of course, getting all your bombs to hit is tough because you don't realize your alignment isn't where you think it is. You think you're over the target, but you're not quite yet over the target because you see it in your view in front of you, but that means below you you're not actually there yet. So since you don't actually have bomber view capability in the game, you'll have to realize that probably out of 4 or 5 bombs, only 2 or 3 of them are really going to hit any of those subsystems reliably. So that would be the Y-Wing builds for bomber. Any thoughts on that? Questions?
I have a little side note,
Yep.
maybe, or footnote rather. Sometimes on the Y-Wing, you're gonna be going against some PK heavy teams or some pretty annoying TIE defenders that are unhittable. You can sometimes help your team out by one of the Y-Wings carrying out one ICT. It's going to reliably disable TIE interceptors because they are fragile. TIE defenders, if they're not outright disabled, they're going to be scared off. TIE bombers cannot dodge the auto aim on the turret, so they're going to be eventually disabled as well. The only fighter that really can stand up to it are the TIE fighters, because they have a modicum of agility and they have the hull to take it between evading some shots and tanking others. You're probably not going to disable the TIE fighter, but TIE fighter is not much of a menace anyway, so that's just a side note, footnote. Sorry, because sometimes you're going to be going against PK heavy teams, and that really helped us off on the the Cadet Cup. When we were on the Alliance side against Night Witches, they had LT Archer and I think Witch Doctor, which were really annoying. TIE Interceptor and TIE Defender. So we were able to neutralize them right away while playing the Alliance side, and that really helped us. We had a relatively easy time on our first match against them, just because of the ICT, I'd say, because it really neutralized two of their players.
Hmm.
Question: What
Yep.
does ITC? What do you mean by ITC?
ICT, sorry.
Ion cannon turret. So this is one
I'm in
of
the
the.
middle of a dogfight.
So this is what he means. This is the defensive ion cannon turret that you can get on the Y-wing, which will automatically, if you activate it for 20 seconds, will shoot ion lasers at nearby targets, stripping them of shields, and if they don't have shields, possibly disabling them. They're pretty good, especially in dogfights, for dealing with TIE defenders, and they could be good also against, say, TIE interceptors or even TIE fighters for trying to disable them, to get them to help killing them. If you're running defense, I would say that it's possible for some of your people to run Ion Cannon Turret as a possible defense against TIE defenders on fleet battles, but keep in mind that if you're doing that, you're probably not farming. And so the persons doing that should not be the farmers, because you don't want to not farm. If you're having an issue with not being able to kill bouncy TIE defenders, the last thing you want to do is try and kill bouncy TIE defenders. The thing you want to do is farm, because if they're being difficult to kill, it means that they're taking too much time per morale. The way you want to look at defense is how much morale can I get per time. The way you want to look at offense is how much damage, cap ship damage, can I do per death. Those are your two metrics.
Yeah, right.
Offense is cap ship damage per death. Defense is morale per unit time.
Let me contest you
Yep.
real quick. The ICT, just one player needs to carry the ICT, and it's really effective, especially on farm poor maps. Let's say
Yeah.
Nadiri or Gallatin, especially on those maps where between weaving amongst the rocks and using the ICT, it really helps fending off PK heavy teams, even during the opening phase or during offense. That's what I'm saying. If you're having trouble doing damage and whatever, I think it's at least debatable and viable tactic. It worked for us against a, let's say, a high-level team on the tournament we played this weekend. And granted, it was a farm poor map and whatnot. Just saying.
No,
I think,
definitely, but
it's gotta be said.
that's as I think that actually jives, because as I was saying, you wouldn't want to do it in place of farm. So you wouldn't want your farm person sacrificing a farm ox like Goliath or Multilock to do it. But if it's a farm poor map, meaning that you don't need all 4 oxes of your bombers being farm auxiliaries, you could have one of them, or maybe someone switches into one that does that ion cannon turret. But you don't want to do it at the cost of farming. Farming is always on defense the absolute priority, and that basically whatever PK you can do is good, but you should never be sacrificing farm to do PK. I mean, you could do both, but you should never be sacrificing your farmers. You should never be pulling your farmers off of farm to do PK. But yeah. So other viable things that you can do are torpedoes. Torpedoes are certainly viable. I don't usually prefer them. There are hit and run strategies that work really well with torpedoes. Basically, if you have a number of guys in your team that like doing hit and run, especially on the X-Wings, but even on the Y-Wings, then the torpedoes are viable. The problem with torpedoes is if you're going against really good players, eventually they'll get wise to it, and if they're not being overwhelmed by it, they can shoot them down, and you'll find that you're not doing enough damage, and eventually they'll farm their way out of things And even if they can't kill you, if they shoot down all your torpedoes and they farm their way out, you haven't done any damage. So it's totally possible to use torpedoes. But I especially ion torps actually against I'm totally against cruisers. So it takes, I think it takes at least three ion missiles to take out a cruiser's shields, but it takes only one ion torp, I believe, to take out a cruiser's shields. And so for cruiser shield deionization and for raider shield, corvette shield deionization, an ion torpedo is totally viable. And
Yeah, on raiders and frigates, it's just one torp.
one, yeah, okay. And I think it's two
Footnote.
against the flagship to take out shields temporarily, 30
Like,
seconds.
it's like 2 and a little bit. You
Yeah.
can get it with basic lasers.
There's another like quirk of the multi-lock is that you can use it to inflict massive damage on components like subsystems. If you lock onto the subsystem and wait for the multi-lock to lock onto nearby turrets, and you fire it point blank at the subsystem, as they go off, they travel a certain small distance forward, so they're all gonna hit the subsystem, and that amounts to 3,000 damage.
That is a fair amount of damage. That's interesting. So yeah, that could be viable, and that could increase the offensive capability of that multi-lock.
So
Um,
especially on the rebel side, you can potentially take out a shield gen on a bow tie or a vendor's loops run on by using multi-lock and meme beam alone. Just hypothetically, but it's not a very common loadout. Just saying that
Right.
in one go on a bomber. But for these surgical strikes, I'd rather recommend if you're going for a vendor's loop or a bow tie, you're better off with the proton piercing for a good one shot, one proton piercing and a few bursts just to make sure. Or if you were going for a more sustained run, piercing and concussion. You fire the piercing outside the shields, and as you slid underneath the shields, you can what's it called? Dump fire your concussions.
Any questions about the bomber? If not, we'll move on to
There
the
is
sport.
one
Yeah.
thing I wanted to, because there is one thing that I wanted to bring up. Basically, when you were talking about the fighter jet, and now back with the bomber, when you're talking about torpedoes, but I was pre-coffee then, so I sounded like a ghoul or something. But you can actually auto shoot the torpedoes and the missiles. If you know when you're aiming and your reticle goes green when you are about to get the lock. At that point, if you are holding the fire button, the game will actually fire as soon as you get the lock, which is very often earlier than you see it, because it's when the server registers that you got the lock, not when the game shows you that you have the lock.
Right. Which could speed up that process.
Very much.
Yeah, that could be quite good. I think really the biggest issue, even more than the lock-on time, especially in fleet battles, is the issue that the torpedoes can get quite shut down. And for ion torpedoes, I mean, the amount of damage that they do is so considerable that it's worth the risk. But for other torpedoes, a lot of really good players will shoot down those torpedoes. But it could work.
Okay, before
yep.
you guys move on from Bomber, would you mind just highlighting your loadout so I could screenshot?
Okay. I also keep in mind that I am recording this, so I will post the video at some point. But I'll real quick. I'm also going to be going through the Imperial loadouts, which are going to mirror these as well, so it'll give you another chance to look at them.
Perfect, thank you.
So support. So almost always you'll have at least one support in a fleet battle. They don't do very much damage, but they enable a lot of damage. The amount of damage that the support enables is considerable, not to be underestimated. And that can happen from a multitude of ways. First, they can provide resupplies to your bombers, to your fighters, to replenish them, to keep them in the field, to keep them from dying and losing you morale. And especially like what I was saying with that bomber build, increasing greatly, force multiplying the amount of damage that that bomber can do. Not only that, but targeting beacons are a must, both for defense and for offense. If you target beacon a player craft, not only are they easier to kill because your teammates will do more damage to them, now your teammates will be able to hit them with whatever missiles they see fit because countermeasures will not work for the player that has the beacon on them. You can beacon a number of players at a time. They work sort of like the multi-locks. They'll send out. They're pretty fast to hit, and you can beacon out a capital ship plus 3 fighters or so all at the same time, and that will hold for how long is it? 20 seconds, something like that. 20 seconds. So, and that it's huge for the amount of damage that you can do on the cruisers. If you mark a cruiser, if you mark a raider, the amount of time it takes you to burn through it is considerably less. And as I said before, the amount of damage you do to the capital ships is basically the number one way, not the number one way, it is the way to win the game. And so if your support player can speed that up by 30% by marking the targets, then that is pivotal. You'll see here it says damage multiplier 130%, meaning that your players will do 30% more damage to whatever you mark, in addition to missiles not being able to be countermeasured. The other thing that the support is sometimes needing to do is provide that third ionization. Like I said, you always want to have at least 3 ionization weapons on the field at any time, if there are any shields left on the field. Ion cannon is a good way to finish off that little bit that, say, if a missile missed or got shot down, or if for some reason it wasn't enough to finish off the shield of something, a cruiser, flagship, the ion cannon can do the rest of the job real quick, strip it out, and then that way no one's wasting their hull shots on the shields, which are exceedingly inefficient. Like, especially on the Rebel side, shooting a rotary cannon at a shield is exceedingly inefficient. It wastes almost all your energy, and you're going to be damned if you're ever going to get that energy back in a Y-Wing. So it's actually really important to get that stripping ability. The supply droid recharge really, really low. Like, you can resupply every 6 seconds or something, 5 seconds, 6 seconds. It's really low. You're going to find that a lot of people are going to be asking for supplies, and it's 8 seconds? Really? Feels like less. It's actually really low. You won't even notice it. So the ion cannon supply droid targeting beacon is my primary support build. It gives you support stripping ability, gives you resupply ability to heal and force multiply your friends, in addition to the targeting beacon, which makes the enemies a lot more killable. Now, keep in mind, you can't supply yourself, but you can dumbfire out your supplies. So if you don't have anyone to target, you could dumbfire out a few supplies so that if your players are going to be in the area, they'll have one ready to go. That's totally viable. Put it at midfield. Then that way, if some of your players are on their way back, they don't have to come all the way back. And if, say, you were busy with someone else or you just resupplied someone else, there's already a second resupply out there. And then the other thing is, you can't resupply yourself, though. So in order to resupply as a support, you do have to go back to the cruiser or to the hangar to resupply. Although if you have 2 supports in the game, which is not usual, but you could maybe, you could resupply each other, which would give you infinite resupplies, and that'd be pretty cool. As for the components, this is really, I think, up to debate. I I have it for now set to reinforced and fortified because I just like being tanky. But totally, support. One of the things about support is they're going to be targeted down quite a bit, especially if they're pretty aggressively helping the bombers and the fighters. So one of the things the support is supposed to be the best at, perhaps of almost anyone, is evasive, 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 evasive. Because the fact is that they're going to be, if they're targeted down, they're going to be targeted down for a long time because their mission never ends. Unlike, say, a bomber whose mission in some essence might partially end because they've delivered their payload, they've destroyed a subsystem, whatever it is, if they get killed after, eventually it's not the end of the world because they did their job. The support's job is never done. And so for them to die is never justifiable to some extent. And so they have to be some of the most evasive, survivable people in the game. And that means that whatever helps you survive, whether it's being a little more reinforced or having more agile hull or whatever it is, see what works for you. But the support player should be basically unkillable, always present, never killed. And it's a tough job. It's a really tough job to do. But the supports are usually really good. The support craft are really good at drifting. And drifting is going to be your friend as a support player. It's going to make you hard to hit. And that's basically getting that drift game going is key to being not only a useful support because you have the ion supply droid targeting beacon or something, another build I'll show you, but also because you're not dying doing it. You're always present, always available to help support the team. Because once the team doesn't have that support, they're going to cry. First of all, they're going to cry, and secondly, they're not going to have nearly the capability they had before, and the whole offense is in jeopardy if that support player is down. So definitely want to be survivable as a support player. Other builds that I use for the support are here's one where you get to do a little damage. Standard laser, ion missile, targeting beacon. This is maybe more for if you need to shield strip a little more aggressively. You could also go ions on the primary as well. Or if you're doing a little more anti-starfighter defense, you could do this, although and if turrets aren't allowed, then this could be a more defensive anti-player build because you could use the ion missiles not only for stripping the raider, stripping the cruisers, but you can use it for dunking, helping to dunk on the players, which they will not be able to evade because if you have the beacon as well, you could have beaconed them. Another build is to go mask and mark. And this is usually very good for if you have your whole team already together. So say you just flipped, you're about to do a attack, say on the flagship all together. You can mask everyone at the same time. Usually mask is not exceedingly useful if you don't have your team naturally together. It's hard to get your team to actually come together in a battle. So this is only really viable if you know that your team's going to all be coming out of the hangar or going on offense all at the same time. But masking your team could provide that extra few seconds of unkillability that puts you in a position to do offensive damage before the defensive team can respond. Yes. The other thing is in general would be this is another anti-player build that's viable in fleet battles, which would be tractor beam and supply droid, or tractor beam and targeting beacon, probably actually, maybe more. And between ion cannon and tractor beam, you can hold the enemy players in place. Your enemy fighters can come in and finish the job. And basically anyone who at first was evasive, at first was hard to kill, can now be made completely killable. Not only that, but if you did it on defense and you tractor beam someone in place, you'll be surprised how much passive damage your cruisers, your flagship can do against an enemy player that is now stationary, especially if they're further away from the flagship. They'll do quite a bit of passive damage there. It's totally viable build. I normally wouldn't do this, but if you have some people that really like player killing, this is the way to go with that. And the other possible build is something like turret, and that would be for defense, not for offense usually, although the rocket turret could do some decent offense. The problem is here, if you did this for offense, you're doing offense, but your job as a support is to be the force multiplier, not the force provider, and so or the force enforcer, the forcer. I don't know, but yeah. So you're supposed to be supporting the other team, the rest of your team, and so these turrets, while they do damage, aren't going to be helping your team do the big amount of damage they can do against the cruisers. So I wouldn't use this on offense, but on defense, if you put out these turrets near your flagship, near your cruisers, you'll find the passive damage is just going to be so great against the enemy players. They're going to have a hard time penetrating your defenses. So turrets, if they're allowed, are quite viable in fleet battles on defense. Would not recommend them on offense. They can do damage, but again, the force multiplication capability of support is too great to ignore. So you wouldn't want to substitute that out for turrets on offense. Any other questions on that? The other thing is marking. So one of the things about marking is that if you do mark the flagship, then one of the tactics you can use is to have two fighters come in and one ion missile on each of the shield gens. And if you ion missile each of the shield gens while the flagship is marked, it'll take the shields down temporarily for 30 seconds. And that's a good way to get an opening attack on a flagship. Basically just two quick ion missiles and their shields are down, and your bombers can then come in easily and finish off the two shield gens permanently, and that's quite viable as a tactic. But basically, I would say on offense, if you're not running targeting beacons as a support, I would venture to say you're not doing it right. It's just too powerful. It's too good to have, to be able to multiply your team's damage by 30%. I mean by 1.3, give them 30% more damage is too much to ignore. Yeah. Any comments on support?
I'd like to make just a quick aside.
Mm-hmm.
I found that the resonant shield is very helpful to me, especially on the opening. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and put it to resonant shield, charge up my shields, and then immediately go to engines. While I'm going in on the Raider, my ion cannons are charging up. By the time I get to a Raider, that ion cannon is usually enough to completely strip it without any help from another ion. Then I mark it, and I've got plenty of boost to get the heck out of there, and hopefully survive long enough to start tossing shields around. Shields, excuse me.
Right.
And that's me.
Cool. No, that's good. I think there's a number of different ways actually to play these things over here, the hull, the deflector, and the engine, depending on your preference, and some of them could work quite well.
The hull that I like is the one that allows for more agility. As you say, evasiveness is a key with support.
Mm-hmm.
And I find if I have a little bit more maneuverability, that offsets the tankiness quite nicely.
Gotcha. So you go light hull then?
Light hull, yeah.
Yeah.
It also increases, I think it increases the distance that you can boost.
It might be because of the increase in acceleration, which helps with boost. Yeah. Yeah, totally. So that would be the support. The only ship I haven't mentioned is the B-wing, which is an alternate bomber. Could be used for hit and runs. Could be used for bombs. You could load 10 bombs in on there. I think the issue with the B-wing is it's actually a lot less tanky than the Y-wing. It's not really any more maneuverable. It's slower, and so it's easier to just gun down. And so usually it's just an inferior Y-wing. but there could be some niche ways that you can get the B-Wing to do more burst damage if you get it in, but I wouldn't really have great faith in it being as sustainable as the Y-Wing. So I don't normally, and I don't think many people use the B-Wing. But maybe.
Can I jump in?
Yep.
On that? So I've been kind of messing with the B-Wing a lot lately, and I've noticed that if you take the gyro and you orient yourself, your body to the left, you have a much more stable firing platform. So while it's not ideal, like anywhere near a fighter would be for dogfighting, you actually get a lot more of a stable shot and a lot better tracking on fighters. So it's a pretty good anti-bomber ship if you're just chasing bombers with it.
To that, I would say that's one of the benefits. It's one of the benefits of using the rotary cannon, is that the rotary cannon, when you're actually using it, has the penalty of maneuverability, but on the bonus, it gives you a much steadier firing trajectory. Basically, it's gonna lock you into some nice arc path that the non-rotaries won't necessarily do. The other thing that's good about the B-Wing is that it does, in its primary weapon, have both regular damage plus ionization damage. So with the rotary cannon on it, you'll have a lot of regular damage and some ionization, and on the regular laser you'll have actually quite a bit of ionization. And so if you wanted to, say, have a build amongst your team where you only had 2 ion people, you could, as a bomber, be the 3rd ionizer and finish off the ionization of any cruiser or any raider. And that's a possibility also, to give more utility and flexibility to the rest of your team to not have to run a 3rd ion. You could run it. But I would say the rotary, if you want a stable platform, the rotary gives you quite a stable shooting platform as well. But yeah, there's certainly ways to use the B-Wing effectively, but I would say that it's probably not nearly as intuitive and easy to mix into any team composition. Let me just quickly switch over to the Imperial side, which is much the same, but I'll just go through it as a review and also to talk about some slight differences of how they're played. Before I do that, go ahead. Yeah.
Give a quick footnote.
Yep.
The B-Wing is also really good to finish off wounded flagships, just like Mandalore did in a tournament. The gyro loadout and proton bombs, you can just wreck face with the B-Wing, and it will also spawn several weak points by damaging hull sections. So it's good to finish off wounded capital ships. Just keep that in the back of your mind.
Because you could drop 10 bombs. Yeah.
And also, he spooled the rotary cannon and fired at the bridge as he did it. It's going to be on the highlights for the tournament.
Yeah, that's a lot of damage output. Yeah, so the B-Wing, in that case, would be probably the best for burst damage output, just raw damage output. So on the fighter side, again, usually, for the more survivable X-Wing, I had gone with ion missile and boost extension, which gave you the ability to maneuver around and get out of a situation if you needed to. Since the X-Wing has shields, the hull is a little less important than it is on the TIE Fighter, where everything that you have is your hull. And so the survivability, I think, of the TIE Fighter is greatly increased if you have a repair. Now, by having this repair, you've given up a fair bit of offense, but if for some reason during your fight you don't need that extra offense, and you just want some survivability, the repair on the TIE Fighter makes, in the end, the TIE Fighter probably the most durable of any ship in the game in terms of just raw damage it can tank. Again, ion missile is too strong, too versatile to not have. Whether you're going against players, going against cruisers, flagships, doesn't matter. Ion missile is the thing to have on the fighter, and it provides the ionization needed on the team. Burst cannon Again, burst cannon better, I think, than laser cannon. I think when there's new players starting, I often tell them use laser cannon because I think it provides for better aim training. Like if you're trying to train how to shoot, the laser cannon is a much better way to do it. You'll have a lot less trigger jerk in the way that you shoot if you shoot with the laser cannon first. But I think if you're trying to do the pokes that we were talking about that the fighters are supposed to do, and that includes the TIE fighter, then the burst cannon does more damage that you can just shoot out really fast and get out. So I totally recommend in fleet battles, even more than in dogfights, I'd recommend a burst cannon for that. Um, Ion missile, concussion missile. You can double dumbfire them against subsystems, works really well. And also, you could stagger fire them against players. If they use their countermeasures against one, they won't have their countermeasures for the other. So you'll be able to shoot them with one of those too. The concussion missile does do a decent amount of damage to capital ships, and it's a good supplement. But you'll find that actually the bursts will be your primary damage dealer against cruisers. Ion jet again because you want to be maneuverable, you want to be bouncy in a fighter, you don't want to be predictable. And the ion jet gives you the ability to turn on and off your boost in order to be making a bunch of small corrections that make it hard for the enemy team to find what you're doing and to find a way to lead you and shoot you. And then for non-shields, maybe concussion rockets, although I would say primarily this is going to be the main build for fleet battles. Burst cannon, ion missile concussions, ion jet, reinforced hull. Between reinforced hull and being able to move, you're going to be pretty hard to kill too. The interceptor. Now, one thing I say peculiarity about the interceptor is I think the interceptor is a lot more viable if your team has decided for some reason that your support is going to go tactical shield. Tactical shield is almost never viable. But in the instance case, and I don't know if this is overall a great strategy, but in the instance case you really wanted to go TIE Interceptor, what you should do is coordinate with your support and have him give you a tactical shield. And the reason is the TIE Interceptor is hit and run, more even than the A-Wing. The TIE Interceptor is hit and run. And in order to be able to survive the run and is to get that tactical shield, because often what will happen is that an enemy player can get 3 or 4 shots off on you before you can run correctly and get out of range or get out of his sights. The tactical shield provides those extra few hits that will make the difference between life and death. It's just a few hits in the TIE Interceptor between life and death, and that tactical shield actually will make a difference. I wouldn't normally recommend that strategy, but I think I've seen it before, and I think it really works well. If someone's going to fly TIE Interceptor, make sure that it's being combined with a tactical shield from the support, and more so the tactical shield than the supply, because again, what the issue here is burst damage down, and the supply resupplying won't prevent the burst damage down. The tactical shield will. But yeah, I'd fly the TIE Interceptor like I'd fly the A-Wing, basically, which is poke, 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 player kill, poke, but it's just so easy to kill that you're probably better off playing that in a TIE Defender or even in a TIE Fighter, where in both cases you're a lot more tanky and you could do a lot more damage because the auxes that are provided, the TIE Fighter and even the TIE Defender, are just better damage dealers than the auxes provided the TIE Interceptor. The TIE Defender is actually really hard to kill if people don't have enough ionization on them and you're really bouncy. So that and the recharge rate on the shields on the TIE Defender is really good. So you can actually be quite unkillable on a Defender if played right. But again, you wouldn't want to play the Defender and start flying in a straight line. If you're going to play the Defender, it's because you play bouncy. You bounce everywhere, here, there, and everywhere. As even more so than a fighter, which you can get away with flying a bit straighter. The Defender, you should not ever be flying straight.
Let me correct you on a fine point.
Yep.
The TIE Defender actually doesn't have a good shield recharge rate. It has a large shield pull, which equals the Y-Wing. The X-Wing actually has a much faster recharge rate.
Yeah.
But the defender has a large shield pool to start with.
So let me clarify that. Yes. So that's right. After the nerf, it's actually less, but the APS on the TIE Defender will give it the ability to recharge its shields instantly, which gives it more, how would I say, responsive shield repair than you would get
Yeah,
on the
it's
X-wing.
the
Yeah.
defensive component, but it's actually 50% uh, of a shield charge. So it's gonna give you something like 600 shield points. Precisely that. If
Or
you have power to shields,
800.
you can use the APS for while you have power balance. It's gonna give I think 30%, but it's not very useful. It's gonna give 30% to every system, but you either want to use it for a clutch shield charge or for the boost if you fucked up your boost gasping. The lasers charge so fast that you just wanna charge them while drifting. Anyways,
Right, and so yeah, so the APS would be really good for a quick boost to the shield or a quick boost to the engines, and that's what the APS is. APS is one of the auxes on the TIE Defender, and what it does is every 20 seconds it gives you an ability to activate it and give yourself a boost of power.
it has been nerfed.
30 seconds. Boost power to the to whatever subsystem you have the majority of your pips into your power priority into. I don't know what it's called. I forgot what it's called, but and it could be really useful. But you wouldn't want to do it into lasers because, like you were saying, yeah, you can both. You can recharge your lasers fast, and also on Imperial side, you can do power shunting, which is the big difference between the Rebels, which is mostly about shield balancing and shield recharge. Where on Imperial side, what you can do is shunt power from one subsystem to another. And one thing that I normally do on any ship on Imperials is I have always powered engines so that I can move faster passively and that I have boost power if I need it. And then when I need to shoot, shunt power from engines over to lasers. And not only will it give me some laser power, more often than not, it'll give me more laser power than I ever would have had on Rebel side because it'll, especially like in the bomber, it just shunts all the way up. You get full double lasers from even like just a fair bit of engine power. And if you a little bit of warning, if you don't have boost and you shunt from engines, it will slow you down temporarily, but only temporarily, and it will give you double a lot of laser power, more I think than if you had just charged your lasers directly.
There's an advanced
Yep.
technique that you can use on the Empire that actually allows you to cross the battlefield on the TIE Interceptor or the TIE Fighter. Especially the TIE Fighter with the burst cannon that has a faster charge rate. At the onset of the battle, you set your power to lasers, you shunt charge, and then shunt back to engines. That will give you a full tank of boost. Then you can boost, just boost, not boost drift. You can boost, go boost gasping, but that's gonna be more intensive. But you can just boost, and when you have with obviously power to lasers to because it will slowly recharge even though it will be under a heavy temporary nerf. But then once you have like one bar of boost left, you drift, and as you drift, you shunt the like it's the murder's reserve Pixel just talked about that will slow you down. It's like the reactor of the ties, the unshielded ties, giving that last ditch effort. And as you drift, you shunt your power to lasers while drifting. Have the power to lasers as well. It's gonna recharge as you drift, and it's gonna let you keep most of your momentum. And you can even fire while doing it, but it's harder. It takes practice. And as you do that, as you drift, you're gonna have a full laser overcharged clip again, right? So you just shunt back to engine, and then you boost away again. It works like a charm for the TIE Interceptor and the TIE Fighter to quickly cross the battle, maybe change your loadout, or maybe get somewhere you need to desperately get in a hurry. So keep that in mind. I can write down the steps later if you guys want to. I've done that in the tournament. I've trained it for the tournament. It really helped to quickly get on the raider and strip it, and then get the fuck out before they hit me, or just switch a loadout. On the TIE Fighter, obviously, you don't want to use a TIE Interceptor on most scenarios on competitive, as Pixel explained earlier. It's very hard. If someone even looks at it, the TIE Interceptor is dead.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely the shunting, mastering the shunting, as Viana was talking about, gives you a lot of capabilities on the Empire. They can be really fast. You can cross the battlefield really quickly, even in a bomber on the Empire side, and that's one of the big advantages, I think, of the bomber in fleet battles over, say, even the Y-wing, is that it can get places quickly with shunting. And not only that, the rotary cannon that I was saying does a lot of damage. And as Viana said, on the B-wing, it was doing a lot of damage. On the bombers, can do a lot of damage over time to any cruiser. The rotary cannon, as good as it is on the Y-wing, is much better on the bomber, because more likely you're going to be double charged on the bomber from shunting than you will be on the Y-wing. And not only that, while on the Y-wing you might find yourself, while burning the Corvette Raider, you might find yourself running out of laser power, even if you put power to lasers. You will be able to quickly reshunt back in constantly into the rotary cannon as you're burning down the Raider, and so you'll almost never run out. I mean, really, I think never. You would run out of, if you shunt enough, run out of laser power as you're trying to burn down the Raider. And so the rotary cannon on the bomber is, to me, such a must. The damage output from it is just so considerable. I almost don't need auxes. It's almost like just gravy to have auxes on the bomber when you have the rotary cannon that you can double charge. So once again, on the bombers, Goliath multi-lock, really good for offensive damage, but also for the farm. Beam Goliath for subsystems, and Goliath proton bomb in combination with your support, especially for doing a lot of damage to cruisers. Now, if you don't have the support, this should be more of a one-off. You should go in, drop your bombs, get out. This build will not do nearly as much damage staying in, especially on the Y-wing side. It will do basically almost no damage staying in. So once you've dropped your bombs, if you have no support and you're in the Y-wing and you're in this build, get out, go resupply those bombs, because your rotary is eventually going to run out pretty quick. It's probably not double charged. Your Goliath does some, but you're more valuable going back, getting another set if you don't have supply with that build. With this one, you could double charge the rotaries, and with the Goliath, you still do some damage. But again, you want to keep in mind your job is to drop your payload and to survive, so that you could drop a payload again. And if you've already dropped your payload, there's no sense hanging around your target. It's time to go. It's time to get out of there and survive. You've served your purpose. So then on the support, again, same builds basically. Squad mask beacon. There's really no difference here on this side that I can tell. Maybe some support player knows some subtlety here, but I would mostly build it the same. The only thing I said was in that odd TIE Interceptor build, which I wouldn't recommend anyway, where you go tactical shield. But everything else, all the things I said on the Rebel side about support, should apply here as well. And that's about it. The good thing with the bomber also is that if you get ionized, you still have actually all of your defenses. If you're on the Y-wing side, you get ionized. The worst thing that can happen is the Y-wing getting ionized, because really the biggest defense they have is that shield, And so if they get ionized, that's almost all their defense gone. A bomber gets ionized, still got most of its defenses. Yeah. Any other questions about the loadouts or any of the other stuff? Okay. The other thing that I'd say is on the rebel side, make sure that before you go in, double charge your shields. Don't go in unprepared. There's no sense going in with single charge shields. Double charge your shields. Also keep in mind that as important as shunting is on the Imperial side, shield balancing is really important on the Rebel side. And what that means is know where your enemies are. Are your enemies in front of you, behind you? Where's the damage coming from? You might want to balance your shields on the side of where your enemies are. If you're running away, you want to balance your shields backwards. There's no sense in balancing your shields forwards if you're running away, if you're on the way out. Now, also, if you are doing hit and runs, you don't want to be going just in a straight line unless you're boosting, and even then, you got to make sure you're not getting shot at, because you could totally just get shot out if you're trying to run away and you're going in a straight line. So do some maneuvering on the way out. Keep in mind what the goal is at every stage of the fleet battle. Deliver as much damage as you can at every moment you can. Try and get as much morale as you can, as quickly as you can on defense within whatever your role is, and you're pretty good to go. We'll look at some other follow-ups and some other lessons. I think this one is mostly focused on loadouts, but we could talk about other tactics that happen, coordination things that happen in fleet battles, in a future lesson. So any final questions? Okay. I'll talk about one other strategy, which people are using, and I think is definitely a really good strategy. When you take the cruiser hulls down and you're about to kill a cruiser, and I talked about this for corvettes and other things in the previous fleet battle tutorial, but when you're on offense and you have a cruiser down to, say, 3 or 4 hull, what people will say, some of your teammates may say, is it's out of phaseable. That means that it's easy, even when you're on defense phase, to go and finish off the rest of the ship, meaning it has basically 1 payload's worth of damage left on it, so 3 or 4% hull or less. In that case, especially if your corvette's dead and so there's no passive damage being done on it, you might want to consider not finishing it off if you're about to go on defense, because it's more valuable to you to be able to get out of defense faster by killing the ship out of phase and getting the morale out of phase while you're on defense phase than it is for you to slightly extend the offense a little further. What will often happen is that the offense, if it's nearly done anyway, you won't be able to do very much more damage, and you definitely don't want to be on defense for very long. So it's actually a better idea sometimes to keep the cruisers at 2 or 3% hull, go to the other cruiser that's still at 80% hull, whatever it is, and try pushing that down as far as you can until the offense ends. And then when the offense ends and you're on defense, you can out of phase kill that other cruiser anyway. You're not really risking as much because you're on defense, so if you die doing it, you're only losing 5 morale or 0 because the bar is already at 0 anyway. And you can dig yourself out of the hole of being on defense that much quicker, which means that basically once you kill the raider and a couple farm sets, you're back on offense again. And it's well worth it. It's a strategy that is being used. I think it is a good strategy, and so be careful to coordinate with your teammates. If you see a cruiser that's at 2 or 3% hull, ask them, are we going to save this for out of phasing? Are we going to just focus the other cruiser and not finish this one right now. And that's usually, if you're less than half morale, that's usually the decision made. But be sure to coordinate with your team and not just kill the ship because it was killable, or not kill it because they intended on killing it. So try and coordinate that. So I think that's the final bit. So last round for questions, and then I'll close it. Okay. Thanks for coming, everyone, and hope to do another Fleet Battle tutorial at some point. I'm not sure what it'll focus on yet, but there'll definitely be some more. Thanks.